Can you hear me? Okay, you can hear me. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here tonight. My name is Susan Beretta. That's an Italian surname. My mother was Mary Collins, and she was born in 1928 in Barravilla, near Skibbereen. Tonight, you're getting a crash course in Ireland prehistory, human cell biology, and genetic genealogy. We all carry a family Bible in our genes, and with it we can find cousins. We can even help solve large-scale historical research problems. Who are these guys is a quote from the movie Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. They uttered it many times while trying to identify a sheriff posse that was chasing them. You will see them frequently in this presentation tonight. Bruce and I live not far from where their hideout was. Every family at some point in their history has an adoption. Sometimes an ancestor isn't who we think he is. My grandfather knew a lot of people, but he did not have a family Bible. My mother and her siblings did not know their grandparents. Socialization with relatives was limited to just a few families. Memories of other relatives have been lost. I have known of step-parents who threw out family photos and memorabilia and of family feuds separating children from their treasured family mementos. Our knowledge about our families is more fragile than we realize. Now let's talk about DNA. For our purposes, DNA is a form of genealogical family data. Data coded into us spans from the dawn of mankind to the present day. Shared occurrences of DNA can help us find cousins. Differences help carve out distinct family lineages and groups. This is a very important slide because it's going to help you understand different kinds of DNA testing. If you can walk away with this information tonight, you will have 50% of the battle. Let's see. This is a human cell. It's that of a man. Inside the nucleus are 23 pairs of chromosomes and are 22 autosome pairs plus the sex chromosomes. The Y chromosome keeps a record of the male lineage. Surnames rose about 1,000 years ago. There is a useful correlation between surnames and Y chromosome data because fathers pass both to their sons. Inside the cell are mitochondria. These are cell organelles converting food into a form of energy available to the cell. The mitochondria have their own genetic code for replication, distinct from what is in the cell nucleus. At conception time, the mitochondria in the female egg, rather than the male sperm, is what the child inherits. So the mother's mitochondrial DNA continues to be passed down through successive generations of females. The 22 chromosome pairs plus the X chromosome are the source of data for near-term genealogical testing. So I'm going to say some of that again. The Y chromosome contains a genetic Bible of the male lineage, and it has a very long historical reach. The mitochondrial DNA, passed successively through females, has a very long historical reach. The autosomal DNA has a more near-term genealogical reach. It can help find recent cousins. Go on. Oops, hang on a second there. Okay. This slide illustrates these genetic tests applied to your family tree. The Y-DNA in blue passes unchanged or nearly unchanged from father to son. Mitochondrial DNA in pink passes unchanged or nearly unchanged from mother to child, successively through females. A person inherits 50% of his autosomal DNA from each parent, but what you inherited from a grandparent or great-grandparent or earlier becomes a roll of the dice. So this is what I call the gene lottery, and I also like to call that kind of test universal lineage, because it tracks all your lines, and that area is like the pale orange that you see there. So if you have a female ancestor you want to research, it doesn't necessarily have to be your direct maternal line, but it could be a female ancestor and you have to find somebody descended in a direct maternal line. So if you've got an ancestor, John Murphy, and you've identified daughters and their lines of descent, their female lines of descent, but you don't know anything about Mrs. John Murphy, if we test the Callahan child at the end of lineage 1, we'll have the genetic pattern of the mother of daughter number 1. You'll have captured that information. If we test the Keefe child at the end of lineage 2, then you'll have the genetic pattern of daughter number 2. If these two test results match, you have proven that daughter number 1 and daughter number 2 shared a direct maternal ancestor. They probably had the same mother. You can apply the same test to the Sweeney child. And then I have a little question at the bottom. Does the DNA tester at the end point have to be female? And the answer is no. It could be male or female, as long as that person is at the end of the sequence of females. But I've been trying in my own research to find direct maternal descendants to help me identify a maternal ancestor I know nothing about. So that's how I apply the mitochondrial DNA test. Let's see here. This is a chart of my direct maternal ancestry. Katherine McCarthy was my third great-grandmother, and she is the end point. I think we call that a brick wall. Her baptism record does not exist. She may have lived in Gortna near Bantry. From Katherine came Margaret Hurahan, then Ellen Hurley, and then my grandmother Mary Collins, then my mother Mary Collins. When I was in Kenmare in 2009, I had only just learned about my great-grandmother Ellen Hurley with the help of the Skibbereen Heritage Center. So that's my direct maternal chain. I had hit the end of my research with Katherine McCarthy, so I had a mitochondrial DNA test done, and the result is stored in a lab database. The data is a genetic description of not only this Katherine McCarthy, but also her mother and her maternal grandmother and the mother before her. There is little to no change in mitochondrial DNA when passed from mother to child. Anyone who shares the same direct maternal ancestry, does the same test, and stores the data in the same place will discover this data and find me as a distant relative. It is just like going fishing. You can put out your bait and you wait. In the same way, once my data is out there, I can sit back and wait. A woman named Betty started corresponding with me about her Collins ancestry. Her ancestor, Jeremiah Collins, was related to my grandmother. One day, we found an obituary for her ancestor, Mary Hurahan, and read it closely. It linked Mary to Mrs. M. Hurley, who was my great-grandmother. Was this news account accurate? As you can see, Betty has a direct maternal is directly descended maternally from this Mary Hurahan. So I had Betty take the test, We were identical matches because Katherine McCarthy is our common ancestor. Baptism records exist for both Mary and Margaret Laham. The mitochondrial DNA test helped distinguish this Mary and Margaret from the other Mary and Margaret Lahams born about the same time. So the mitochondrial DNA test helped us validate our research. We are third cousins once removed through our direct maternal lines. And then nothing for 6 years. Now what? So over the years, matches trickled in, but they were too far apart in time and geography from Katherine McCarthy to make sense. The fact is, though, that Katherine McCarthy, Ann Stanton of Maryland, and Martha Eubanks of Texas all once shared a direct maternal ancestor. Then last year, this match appeared, Katherine Laham. To make a long story short, Katherine Laham was born Katherine Murphy within a few years of my ancestor Katherine McCarthy and lived about 20 miles away. We know the two women were related to each other because they shared a direct maternal ancestor. No church record exists linking them. So, at this point, you know that the Y chromosome DNA in men can trace male lineage. The mitochondrial DNA can trace female lineages. And the autosomal DNA applies to all your lineages. It's universal. So finding relatives depends on what you do, what you win in the gene lottery. You also know that anyone can test their direct female lineages or universal lineages, but only men can test their male lineage. Okay, now we're going to talk about ancient Europe. The left map shows the ancient group of people that emerged after the last ice age out of the Balkans and spread through Europe. Some researchers believe they were among Europe's earliest inhabitants. Over thousands of years, a group of descendants settled in the British Isles and developed their own mutations. Ireland is on the edge of Europe, and descendants of these people persisted there. Notice the dark blue areas in Western Ireland. The second map shows a simplified view of the ancestors of more recent arrivals. Now, I would not take this too literally because every time they dig up ancient human remains, the picture shifts slightly. So maybe these people were from up here. I'm not really sure. I hear a different opinion almost every time I work on this. So these more recent arrivals came to dominate Europe. How these later arrivals interacted with the group coming out of the Balkans is not known. The darker the arrow, the older the people. Each of these groups developed their own mutations. People represented by the lighter colored arrows inherited mutations from people with the darker arrows. So that's how we trace people across Europe. Notice the pale green arrows bunched up around the Celtic Sea. At the ends of these arrows are numerous labels. The two are labeled Northern British Isles and Northwest Europe. These names were invented for this presentation as there are not as yet good descriptions of these people. Notice the South Irish, Dalcosh, North Irish, and Lagan, the latter also called Irish Sea. These group-defining mutations probably occurred in a period from the end of pre-Christian times through the first millennium. South Irish in particular has played a major role in County Cork. This is a very simplified family tree of the ancient peoples who were part of the settlement of Cork and Ireland. The darker the name of the group, the older the mutation. The child groups inherited the mutations of their parent groups. So your genealogical relatives have to be out on the same branch as your branch. For example, a Collins man with the Alpine Celtic mutation won't share the same paternal Collins ancestor as that of a Collins man carrying the South Irish mutation. A Balkans Isle Driscoll won't share a direct paternal Driscoll ancestor with a South Irish Driscoll. Let's see. Genetic testing appears to have uncovered two different groups of O'Hanrahans from North Munster. Lagan Irish C. Horgan is this name form that has a particularly strong presence in Cork and Kerry. Hanrahans of Dalcosh ancestry are appearing in Clare, while those of the Northwest Europe group apparently are from Tipperary. So from the South Irish emerged people carrying very familiar Cork surnames, which you'll see at the bottom here. Now we'll talk about the Corkily. Some early research by a Corkily genetic study shows that about 14% of its participants are descended from those Balkan Isles people, while almost all the remaining are descended from the newer arrivals, and most of them fall into South Irish. The Balkans Isle presence is largely due to people named Driscoll. Identifying true Corkily descendants is problematic because many of the surnames out of the Corkily are polygenetic, meaning the name arose out of multiple septs throughout Ireland. Third, 19th century scholar John Donovan translated old texts which were published in the Miscellany of the Celtic Society. These are just some of the Corkily surnames that were examined. The names of some in the Corkily may have merged with the names of more recent arrivals so that the original separate names became indistinguishable. Genealogical records show that people calling themselves Driscoll also used many other surnames. The Driscolls do not have a bloodline chieftain like the O'Donovan. Nobody has come forth to claim the title. Historical documents trace a lineage from Ith through High King Lug Macan, about 250 Christian era, to a Driscoll of about 940 Christian era. And that map there shows their territory. These are extracts of church records and type allotment books showing forms of the Driscoll name. We have yet to link these forms with specific genealogies or specific Y-DNA patterns. At top is Minahan alias Driscoll from Ross Carbery. First column shows Dennis Finn Driscoll of Drina, and there's a Driscoll Doolan, also of Drina. William Driscoll Finn of Kilbarry. Driscoll Lug in Ballylynch, near Baltimore, Driscoll Grieve in Kilmeen Parish, and then the second column has Driscoll Cadigan of Kilmackabee. Cadigan is a surname of major interest. And we also have Driscoll Kula of Baltimore Hill, Driscoll Paca or Parka of Skull, Driscoll McIntosh of Duras, and this is just a fraction of the Driscoll variants I have found. Remember, in Y-DNA, the genetic material is passed from father to son with little or no change. So to find cousins, we test up to 100 locations on the Y chromosome. These locations we call markers. I call them addresses sometimes. The green column at the very left shows the IDs of 2 men named Driscoll in the Driscoll project. Their results are divided into 2 rows so they'll fit on the slide. Each marker, or the orange row, it's kind of a brown row here, that lists the location or address on the Y chromosome, and they're numbered sequentially from 1 to 67. If you remember, I said as many as 111 addresses are tested. Here, these 2 men only tested 67 addresses. So each marker contains multiple repetitions of a DNA pattern. The more markers at which the number of repetitions match, the greater the probability these 2 testers are genealogical matches. These 2 men probably have a common Driscoll ancestor within the past few hundred years. There is only one difference at 67 tested locations. I would like to see these men test the full 111 locations to see if there are more differences in their results. Number 138782 has a family Bible. He knows his ancestor was from Skeef. Thanks to him, the other tester, 128677, might have better information on the origin of his Driscoll ancestor. This particular genetic test on the Y chromosome is called a short tandem repeat test. At each location, we count the number of repetitions of the DNA pattern. That's about as simple an explanation as I can come up with. This slide is already obsolete. What I'm saying here is I don't have, my father was not Driscoll, so I couldn't have tested him for the Driscoll project. I don't have an uncle named Driscoll that I could test for the Driscoll project. So for many years, my Driscolls were lost in that universal lineage area. And this trip, I've met a Driscoll man who's a distant relative who represents my Driscoll ancestry, and I have now got his sample for the Y-DNA project. But I do have Driscoll cousins who fall into that universal lineage area who are my matches, and they live around Skibbereen, so they're not too far from where my Driscolls were. I keep a research journal on my Driscolls, and some of them went to Maine in the United States, and they lived not too far from a place called Driscoll Island, and I have no idea how that island got its name, but I thought that was a pretty picture. Okay. Collins. The O'Cullain inhabited a Limerick kingdom, and the O'Cullain inhabited the Cork Lee. So these are, in the historical literature, I have seen this as 2 sources of the surname in Cork. However, that does not necessarily mean the Cork Collinses have 2 genetic ancestors. It gets a lot more complicated than that. I visited Kenmare in 2009. At the time, I was just barely starting my Collins family research. This is on my grandmother's side. And when we were there, we took photos in Kenmare of us goofing around in a stone circle, and I sent the photos back to my Aunt Peg, and she said, "Well, you know we have cousins in Kenmare, don't you?" No, I didn't. So she told me a wonderful story about how about the age of 17, she went down to Kenmare and spent a day at the races with distant cousins, and she said, oh, one of them was a chemist, and their father was a cop. So she gave me enough information for me to find this man here. So So Daniel in 1865 was difficult to research. I found his RIC constable record and eventually found his census records, along with his marriage record and the birth records of his children, including Daniel. My research was published on the internet, and then in the autumn of 2010, a man named Burr contacted me and said Daniel the cop was my grandfather. Burr did tell me that while they were growing up, every time he and his siblings asked their father about their Collinses, he was very reluctant to talk. So for decades, they knew almost nothing about their Collins family history other than that there was a Skibbereen origin. There may have been a family feud involved, along with a step-parent who threw out family memorabilia. So we never determined exactly what happened. To make sure we had linked the correct two families together, I had Burr and Sonny, who is my grandmother's nephew, do some DNA testing. And that is their DNA test out to 111 locations. And they match 109 out of 111 values. So testing, that proved without a doubt that they shared a direct paternal ancestor. Testing does not prove they were second cousins, but it proves that they shared a paternal ancestor. But Bernie was very happy to have that result. And unfortunately, he died last October. When I started planning this trip a year ago, I was conspiring with his daughter to show up on his doorstep and surprise him. But he died last October of cancer, so we never got to surprise him. Getting back to Collins's, let's see, where am I? When I took over active management of the Collins Project in 2014, there were only a handful of testers with ancestry from Cork. One Collins is descended from the Balkans Isles people I mentioned earlier. That's the turquoise square near Cork McSherry. The red square at Crossberry, roughly Crossberry, is a tester confirmed to carry the mutation of the very ancient Bellbeaker people from Central Europe. If he were to conduct further, deeper testing, we might be able to reclassify him into something more recent. The pink shapes with the purple outlines are a bit, South Irish. From the historical literature about Collins and Limerick associated with the Ephigenti kingdom, we might expect them to be South Irish. So far, there aren't many in that category, but I just took over the project a few years ago and I'm hoping to discover more. The red shapes with the green outlines were Alpine Celtic. That again is from Central Europe. I was told by people researching that group that Alpine Celt descendants did not have a significant presence in Ireland, but I seem to be turning up an unusual number of them in Cork, and they're almost all named Collins. If two pins on this map are the same color and the same shape, they are genealogical cousins, but they were very distant ones. So the two red triangles are remotely related. The two red squares are remotely related. The circle up there has, up and further up there, has no genealogical matches yet. The Y test I told you further about, called the short tandem repeat, I like to sometimes call that shallow Y, and that's for finding genealogical matches. There's another test on the Y chromosome called deep Y, which is more historic. It goes back much, much further. So the guys with the same, the men with the same colors share that deep Y ancestry, but they're not in a recent genealogical time frame. Because I have so many different genetic patterns for Collins, this reminded me of Humpty Dumpty. So I think he said, when I use the name Collins, it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more nor less, because I've had so many diverse results for Collins. This project here has opened a can of worms. There's a number of us with Harahan ancestry from West Cork, and because of the condition of old records, I felt compelled to look at several of these surnames. So the project is now expanded to look at all these surnames. And what we're learning is that the heraldry means nothing. Three of these surnames share a very similar heraldry, but their genetic backgrounds are very different. These maps show the relative distribution of these surnames in the 1901 Ireland census. The red map is Haran. While studying this, we're studying this name because some researchers have proposed O'Horan as the name of some Corkally tribesmen, and I'm looking for them. So they should be around in Cork somewhere. The green map is Horrigan. Most of our project members falling in this same category show an ancestry from the Irish Sea. The blue map is Hanrahan, the distribution of Hanrahan. Most Project Hurrahans appear to have a Tipperary origin and fall into the Northwest Europe genetic group. One member with County Clare ancestry falls into Dalcash, which was our original research hypothesis. We thought that Hanrahan would be Dalcash. And then the fourth map is Hurahan in Cork, and you'll see the heavy concentration of that name in Cork. About 70% of people with that name in the 1901 census are in Cork. The family lore that I've been given is that they either came from County Clare or Tipperary, somewhere in North Munster. So far, I have not uncovered genetic evidence of that. The three Horahans I've tested to date are South Irish, which was a big surprise. And this is an example of some of the records we're dealing with. We don't know what's really in a written name. This first record is a type allotment. Is Hanrahan in Castleventry actually a South Irish Horahan? And then the second record is from Ross Carberry Church Records. Is Huracan a South Irish Hurahan? And then I have a Huracan in Galway, whose name is actually Horrigan today, and he does not match the other Horrigans with Irish Sea ancestry. So what his background is, it remains a bit of a mystery. I don't know if you can see that pink area very well or not. Can you see pink on the left side there? The map is shaded pink. You can see kind of the red divider line there. I went through 19th century church records and was looking at Hurahan, and just about any man named Mortimer, Morty, Eugene, or Owen were confined to that area kind of south and west of that area around Skibbereen. And the name was largely absent from the rest of Cork. And I'm wondering if if there's a genetic significance to that. So that's one of my research questions there. And I just got a sample this week from someone falling in that light pink area. So I hope to find out soon. This is the O'Mahony project. The Mahonys split into two groups. The Carberry and Connor O'Mahony settled around Bandon, Murragh, Kilmurray, and Kilmichael. The other divisions settled in West Cork, but I think they spread around. From O'Mahony Finn in Skull came several groups. One went to Kilmichael and Kilmurray, and other branches in Kilmaglory and County Kerry, settling next to their eastern cousins. O'Mahonys are largely South Irish, but the O'Mahony Society Journal, specifically volume 37 from 2015, cites a number of O'Mahonys in the project bearing the mutation of the Dalcosh, not South Irish. So it appears that a group of Dalcosh descendants wanted the O'Mahony name and decided to keep it. My own Mahoney ancestors were from Breda in Drimoleague. There were men named King Mahoney in this family. In Drimoleague and Drina church records, families with men named King were apparently restricted to the area in that tan or gold color. So they seem to have been confined there. So in terms of my own family research, I'm curious to find Mahonys from Clashduff and around that area to see if we have a genetic relationship. For several years, I was pestered by somebody asking, he has North Drimoleague Mahoney ancestry, and he kept asking me, have you gotten anybody tested? Have you gotten anybody tested? Are we related? And I told him 5 years ago, I don't think we're related because your family has lots of Georges, Rebecca's, Anns, and my family has Timothy's, Kings, and Dennis's. And anyway, I've been proven right. We weren't related. So that's my next step in Mahoney research. I want to expand out from what I know about my Mahonys. The O'Donovan story is similar to that of Collins. One group came down from Limerick, and another group with a similar name was in the Cork League. There may have been a merging of two slightly different names. However, the Donovans tested to date are much more consistently South Irish, unlike their tested Collins kin. With a sufficiently rich sample of Donovans, we should be able to distinguish descendants of Cork from the Limerick arrivals. We should be able to distinguish between the three clans of the sons of Ancram, and we may even be able to distinguish among the Donovan pet names. I've only listed a few there. Similarly, if we can assume that the Sullivan pet names identify distinct family lines, DNA testing can carve out those lines and possibly restore that identity to descendants out in the diaspora, unaware of their Sullivan heritage. This map shows a number of different McCarthy branches in the barony of Carbery. Highlighted are Clan Cremeen in red, Clan Dermot shown in dark green, and Clan Tig Island shown in dark blue. But there are many others. There was never a single Mr. McCarthy forebear who sired all these branches. There was a Mr. McCarthy progenitor from about the 13th century who spawned Duna, Forshig, Rabat, and Tallinn. And another Mr. McCarthy progenitor sired Kunik, Giduk, and Menik. So we have an incredible variety of McCarthys. My mother, the girl in the yellow dress in those photos, had 3, maybe 4 McCarthy lines. On her mother's side, we know of one McCarthy lineage and another one is a possibility. My grandfather's ancestry also includes 2 McCarthy lineages. There is a family legend that grandmother and granddad were distant cousins. Nobody knows who the shared ancestors were. They were 2 different Collinses, so it wasn't through Collins. One of my mother's siblings did universal lineage testing. I ran a computer program on the data called Are Your Parents Related? The program calculated my grandparents to be fourth cousins, possibly further back, so there may be some truth to the old family legend. If I were to speculate on the common ancestry, I would guess McCarthy. This surname has turned up more than any in my family tree. So this is what you know now about Y-DNA testing. In my own opinion, I think Y-DNA testing is the gold standard because fathers have historically passed both the surname and the Y chromosome to their sons. The costs are coming down. This just is a comparison of what a test might cost. The advantage to Y-DNA testing is that your results are going to be there for good. You are leaving a legacy to your children. You won't ever have to retest. Genetics technology continues to get better and better. We're finding out more now than ever. These pictures in the first column just remind us of the genealogical records we have lost to destruction and deterioration. Even if we were able to magically restore lost records, many family historians in the Irish diaspora still wouldn't have what they need to pinpoint their ancestral origins. A DNA test is a custom genealogy record that could potentially fill in their missing link. The second column just shows a ladybug on top of an iceberg. That's just a way of showing that very little is known compared to what remains to be learned. And then the jigsaw just represents a gigantic historical puzzle that many of us are attempting to reconstruct. Any questions? I think that's it.